everyone. Welcome. We have Hoozie Chapman here today with us, and we are really, really grateful for you to coming along, Hoozie, and sharing a bit about yourself, your work, and your mahi in this neuroscience and trauma-informed space. I'll get us started with the karakia. See, here we go. Karakia te matanga. Manakitia tene hui, manakitia tene rohu, manakitia tene whanau. Tai noa ki teine kaupapa. Arahina na korero, arahina na patai. Arahina na ture nei ki a puta ai te maramatanga. So, bless this meeting, bless this group, bless this family as we come together for this gathering. Guide the discussion, guide the questions, guide the intent so that we move onwards to greater. Kia ora. Hoozie, thank you for coming along. Just a little introduction from me, Hoozie, and then Hoozie on to you. But I met Hoozie in a really strange way. Heard a bit about what Hoozie was doing on a post on Facebook, and I just reached out to Hoozie and I said, I really want to hear more about what you're doing. And this is so aligned with what we're trying to do in the space in Aotearoa. And although I know, Hoozie, you are in Australia at the moment, you've worked here, you are from Aotearoa, and you have such a deep understanding of not just the neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches from a Western worldview, but also from an indigenous and Te Ao Māori sort of worldview. So I was super excited, and I said, I have to reach out, and that's how I reached out to Hoozie. And Hoozie's also supporting me with some coaching, which I'm really, really grateful for. And so thank you for coming along. I am really excited to get us going, but first on to you, Hoozie. Would you like to introduce a bit more about yourself, your journey of how you've landed up from Aotearoa to Australia and all the fabulous stuff you've been doing?
Yes, sure. Brian, thank you so much for the introduction. Most importantly, the karakia. It's beautiful to hear the language being spoken and immersed in our everyday life. And so it's only right for me to tukumihi ki a koe, to acknowledge you formally, the founder and chair of NATINA, and a warm mihi. He mihi mahana ki a koe, he mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa e mātakitaki maina koutou o tēnei kōrero. Those of you listening from home, from the office, wherever you are, thank you for connecting and thank you for being part of this kōrero and this discussion. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, o te rā tēnā tātou katoa. My name is Hoodia. And it was through school that I was given the nickname Hoozie. And so that has naturally taken its place in my life, hence Hoozie Chapman. I am of Māori and Fijian descent. My father's Fijian, from the cluster of islands, Lomaiviti, the island of Ovalau, the village of Levuka, Whangandathi, and on my mother's side, we are from Ngāti Tautahi, is our hapu, from Te Tai Tokerau. Yes, and so long story short, that is where I hail from. 3 things to describe me. I am wild at heart. I am an out-of-the-box thinker, and I have a love for learning. Go figure. I like to say sometimes that I started on one side of the principal's office, or the desk rather, and then ended up on the other side of the desk. That's literally the story of my learning journey.
And that is amazing. That is amazing.
My relationship or my experience with Te Reo Māori or Te Ao Māori started from birth. Formerly, at Kohanga. So I went to Kohanga at Grayland School Primary. From there, I entered into bilingual education, mainstream education, because my parents wanted to ensure that, as Apirana Ngata says, to harness the tools of both worlds and be confident in standing in both. So I can say, yes, I can do that confidently today.
Amazing.
And yeah, I guess my school journey continued into my adulthood.
You never left school, Hoozie.
Pretty much, pretty much.
So, Hoozie, tell me a bit about where and at what point did you start being interested in, neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches? What was the catalyst that made you start looking into that space? I just think in Aotearoa, this journey is just beginning for teachers, educators, even individuals, and it's only just begun in the last few years, I would say. That momentum is really growing and picking up. So you started off really early on. How did that begin? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. I have always had uh, a fascination with the mind and how it works. And so I think naturally when I was younger, I used to think about what other people were thinking about or what drove their behavior, why they did what they were doing. More so, I was curious. I was curious about why things were the way they were and whether they had to be that way. And so
Yeah.
the environment that I was brought up in was quite an adventurous one. It was also filled with a lot of experiences that enabled and promoted empathy for other people. Uh, I have 3 other siblings. So there's 2 girls, 2 boys. We grew up alongside other children who either didn't have homes
Mhm.
or so homeless,
Yeah.
those at risk, uh, and children trying to make something of,
Yeah.
find love. So
Yes.
they were on that search. So I think those experiences added to my curiosity and my questioning about why are things the way that they are and do they need to be this way?
Yes.
Now, how I translate that into education is, this is a strong opinion here. We are taught what to think, not how to think. We're in the inculcation of all this information and the expectation to regurgitate all the information at the end of a term, at the end of the year. I think, really, is that the best that we can do? And I'm all for experiential learning. And so I'll come back to your question. It was curiosity and questioning, like, why? Why is this the way that it is? And
And
then
that curiosity, Hoozie, is really foundational, isn't it? That's what we talk about when we encourage people to start looking at things through a trauma-informed lens and a neuroscience-based lens. Be curious and explore, understand the why beneath, everything you see. Understand the why, look beyond the behaviors. And so amazing that, you've sort of grown from this personal space of curiosity. And that's where your journey started. And empathy, you mentioned empathy. Um, I, and those personal experiences that, created opportunities for you to be empathetic, I guess. And what I'm finding is more and more people who come into this space who are keen to learn and grow in this space. Whether it's in education, whether it's in community, whether it's, in the mental health space, they often do come from that place of empathy and curiosity, isn't it? It's about
yes.
how do we do better for others, by others, and with others. So yeah, amazing. So Where in the education space, where did your journey begin? Because you started off in Tamaki Makaurau as a teacher, and then obviously you've gone on to becoming a principal, and then you've moved out of that as well. So tell us a bit about that journey and progression. How did that sort of happen?
Yes, well, I can tell you that I never ever thought I would be a teacher, let alone a principal. I tend to do a lot of perspective taking. I take a
Yeah.
step back and I think, oh, is that the lifestyle I want to live? It looks like a very, very busy one. And what do you know? I find myself leading a school in the remote Western Australia.
Yeah.
Um, Immersed, living and working within an indigenous community.
Yeah.
I had finished a contract almost 10 years ago, and I had an open door, and I thought, jeepers, I could go anywhere I want, experience something new.
Yeah.
And within this realm of education, where might I want to be? And my heart has been for the Indigenous people.
Mm.
My parents were living in Australia at the time, and I didn't know where on earth they were living in this remote place. And I thought, I'm going to go and visit them. I did. And apparently, when you swim in the water here, you never want to leave. It's that good. So I did. No, I fell in love with the Kimberley. It's very rugged, it's very raw, it's very real. And it didn't take long for me to fall in love with this place. And I thought, well, in order to get an authentic experience of what Australia has to offer, I want to start with the grassroots. I want to live and work amongst the Indigenous people here. And that was the bravest step I've ever taken, and I will never ever regret
Mhm.
stepping out of my comfort zone and into an absolutely new environment.
Yeah. And Jose, within that space for you, because I know you've mentioned it, before that it was quite an isolated sort of, community as well. And so the community had to be self-sufficient, but also you were often connected with each other and you had to depend, on each other and have those, close connections to sort of work together and live together. What was that like in that space, having a school where you sort of, introduced the trauma-informed approach, and how did that work out, not only within the school community, but also the wider community? How was that sort of, what was that journey? What was that experience? And also getting, other staff on board. What was that like? Because often, one of the things that, I've heard teachers who are interested in this space or principals who are interested in this space really keen to get going, and they say, how do we get going, what do we do, so
Mm.
we know this, we've attended a workshop, or we've sort of heard about this, and yeah, we think it's great, but then in practice, you know what's the practical application of it? How do you get it going? Yeah, so what was your experience?
Yeah, where to start? I think it's important to add context to what you've said so that we can have a clear picture of what exactly this looks like. We were located, or are located, the school is, and the community, 2,000 kilometres north of the nearest city that you know of as Perth. We are 500 kilometres from the nearest domestic or international airport.
Wow.
The driveway to the main road is around 80 kilometres of dirt road. And we have two seasons, wet and dry season. During the wet season, flooding takes place and the community becomes an island. Now, at the end of every year, we've got to get out before the big rain comes. Otherwise, we're stuck. And I remember one trip we took all our staff out for the end of the year, it took us 4 hours to drive 80 kilometers of dirt road. That adds context, and it is very complex, and there are very many layers to doing your job alone. There are so many other factors working against you.
Mm.
So the community they are around 250 to 300 people in population, and about a quarter of that makes up the school. So
Wow.
that's context.
Yeah.
It's awfully hot out there, so self-regulation in all facets of your being is
Yeah.
tested and refined. Coming back to your question of how our, I think, not I think, I know that a lot of people's perceptions or expectations of
Mhm.
what education, living and working within a school, in a community, what they think it is, and the parallel of what's happening or what it is realistically is absolutely it's shocking, to be honest. It's a massive culture shock, and we've had many teachers come from the city
Yeah.
and get on the ground and didn't realize that it was going to be very hard. And I'm going to say that you have less access to resources that you would if you
Mm.
lived closer to where the main the sources are.
Yeah.
And so it requires you to be resilient. It requires you to adapt to change on a daily basis and moment by moment, because you never know what is going to pop up. We've had a donkey stand outside our canteen waiting for food. We've had cattle walk through the school, and we've had to get our local station men to take them away. We've had some of our groundsmen who have had to be snake wranglers. So there's so
Yeah.
many different complexities in addition to the teaching.
Yes.
And I'd like to bring it back to trauma, because this is the focus of our kōrero tonight. What's key to understand is what trauma is,
Mm.
what trauma looks like. And neuroscience tells us that not one brain thinks alike. Now, if I think that, oh, this is trauma, and another person thinks, no, this is trauma, we have a problem here. So a shared understanding of what trauma is
Mm.
and how trauma shows up is really key. And number one was getting the team together. The team involves the school teaching staff,
Mm.
and it also includes our local community staff,
Mm.
parents, and yeah, and they are also the parents as well within our communities. They are our superheroes. We formed, as a result of our discussions of what trauma is, we formed a whole school approach. We did a whole school audit on
Mm.
what it means to us, how it shows up, what are we observing from our students.
Mm.
What one of the biggest barriers was at the time was behavior.
Yeah.
And now we can look at our kids and think, gee, these kids are misbehaving a lot. Or we can ask our question, which comes back to my why. Why are the kids experiencing all these different emotions, and what can we do about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If we look at the origin of the word trauma, it actually means wound or wounded. And
Mm.
now we know that if something is wrong with us, if we have a scratch, if we have, etc., a wound, when we touch it, it's going to hurt. And so if we hit a spot with a child, if we talk about something that is, a sore spot for them, there's no doubt we are going to get a response, or yet a reaction. And are we tailored and reshaped how we looked at their learning environment, not school, not an institute, our learning environment? Number one, we had a shared understanding of what trauma looked like and how it showed up, because teachers were sharing what was happening for them in their classroom and how often. And we also working along, collaborating with our local community members was invaluable. And we got so much insight because we actually found that they were experiencing and learning a lot about themselves as we were learning about the kids too. So there was a vicarious experience and learning. Now, what's also important to understand, which is a key point, is language. Where I was located, there is Creole, like Pidgin English, and that is the dominant language of the location where I was. And there are around 2,000, maybe 3,000 words in the language. And so there is a limitation as to what words are used to express an emotion. So
Okay.
the two main ones were I'm weak, which meant lethargic or exhausted, or I'm too tired to do anything.
Yeah.
I'm weak. And I think that's the main one that comes to mind right now. Now, there are so many different emotions, and if we're not able to articulate what we are experiencing or what's happening for us, how
Yeah.
do we know how to start responding to that positively and self-regulating? We
Yeah.
had to literally teach and equip our students with the language
Yeah.
about emotions, because we know that trauma, a result of trauma, is that we disconnect from our emotions. And so we had to teach our kids what each emotion felt like,
Yeah.
equip them with the words. I can say that it was highly successful, so much so that our students were articulating how other people were feeling, and at times how teachers were feeling. And
Yeah.
the strategies that were put in place to help the students to self-regulate, they were beginning to share them with the teachers when they noticed, oh, you're looking a bit flustered. Let's remember this strategy. This is what we do. And so that, long story short, that was
Yeah.
a really great outcome.
Amazing. And Hoozie, where did you find, because I know you've said getting resources, getting supports, in a community like that is so hard. Um, I mean, I live in the city, and I think if, a school had an issue, they would contact a specialist from ministry or somewhere, or RTLB. Um, where did you draw on, where did you get your, I guess, knowledge, understanding, tools, strategies to start using within, your team and your school? Where did all of that come from?
Well, that is a good question. And when you're limited, you are required to innovate, to innovate. And so we did that. I'd
Okay.
like to draw upon the term collective intelligence.
Yeah.
Our school, we had a shared belief that we are all intelligent and we all have these natural skills. And if we have a shared, we've got this shared, I'm going to call it a matter.
Yeah.
And with our understanding and with our own personal skills, what can we do with this to get the best outcome? Then we have an idea of our shared capacity and
Mm.
what we are able to achieve within our own environment. Then when we were able to identify the needs that we could meet and the needs that we needed more assistance, then we started looking at who might be most effective to meet these needs and how can we form these partnerships. I can say that we did do that. There is some really substantial research about FADS-D within the Fitzroy Valley in the West Kimberley, which is just down the road. It's a bit different to just down your road, your way in New Zealand. Just down the road, about 2.5 hours to the nearest town.
Gosh. Yeah.
A lot of research was taking place, international research about FASD, and the wonderful ladies there at the Man and Wantikura, they were able to inform us of what's the best approach to take, and we teamed up with Royal Far West. Long story short, each of our students in the school had their own personal profile of their learning needs and their strategies to help get the best out of them. And then we also added to that, we called them growth profiles. We wanted to work on moving forward.
Yes.
And our focus was objective. It was about what can we harness and how are we going to move forward, as opposed to, oh man, we're having so many problems, etc., etc. Focusing on the positive and being objective.
And that is so critical, isn't it, Hoozie? Because I mean, as a parent of, 3 boys with different, needs, I remember when my oldest was first diagnosed, this was before he was 2 years even. I recall having this moment of, oh no, what's this, poor me. And it probably lasted a few weeks, and then I was jumping into action and going on about what does this mean and how are we going to get supports and what are we going to do, and who do I need to sort of connect with and learn from and things like that. But also what I've noticed is there were other parents down the journey, sort of I met, and they talked about how they could not sort of handle that. And for months, they didn't want to deal with a specialist. They didn't want to sort of, engage, interact with people. And it took much longer. And one of the things, you know, just in parallel, sort of, I'm thinking about is it is so important and critical, isn't it, in that leadership space for whoever's leading the principal to actually have that positive mindset and go, what next, what now, how are we going to, make this happen for all our kids, how are we going to support all our kids, compared to this is too hard, or, it's just too difficult, or this is just upon the children and parents, and there's nothing we can do. So I think that mindset in terms of leadership is so critical and important. I guess, like you said, you've always had that natural curiosity, you've had that natural empathy, and so probably came really naturally to you to go, what are we going to do with all these challenging behaviors we're seeing? But I'm wondering, what is your advice to leaders, to principals who are in situations where they are having behavior challenges, and they're finding it hard to, again, with limited resources, deal with, moving forward with that positive mindset? What would your encouragement be? What would you recommend, they start looking at to start having that shift and supporting their teams to move ahead as well? Yeah, because we've often talked amongst our members, and we've always said it really comes down to principals, because individual teachers can be really enthusiastic. They might go learn on their own. They might implement things in the classroom, but it does not have the full impact unless you have that collective approach to trauma-informed, approaches within the school, across the school. And I love what you talked about, that collective intelligence. Um, how do you get that happening? What's your message to principals out there?
Gee, well, you may have heard it before, but I still think it's really important is that people don't care about what you say until they know that you care. And
Yeah,
so caring genuinely about the people that you lead is key. I will know before the end of the first term what 20 things bring joy to each of my staff, what they love doing, what energizes them. I will know what makes them feel valued. We will have shared values as a team. So the school has, or a business will have their values.
yeah.
And then as a team, individually, what's important to us and what does that look like shared? That allows for also shared accountability. Or we can pull somebody up if it's like, hey, remember this? This keeps us aligned.
Yes. Yes.
With leadership, there has been a shift from what that looked like traditionally in the modern world to what it does now. And what I mean by that is how we lead.
Mm,
How I led and how I lead is co-leading. It's about we, not I. And I'll draw upon the Māori worldview. Our language is based around we. It's always about we. It's not about I, because if we flourish, then I'm flourishing.
absolutely.
And that's where manaaki comes in. Manaaki, tētahi ki tētahi. It's shared. When you look at a woven kete, it's not one piece of strand that makes up that whole basket of knowledge. It's all the individual strands coming together. And so I think humility goes a long way with leadership. Humbling yourself, being vulnerable,
Mm,
that is key. If you can't make mistakes in front of other people, then they're gonna hide mistakes. The people that you lead are gonna hide their mistakes. So you need to show up how you want your team members to show up. We set the environment, we set the tone
mm,
for our team. And I've brought it up with you before, Freyan, about emotional contagion.
mm,
If
yeah.
I'm heightened and aroused as a leader and I enter into this space where
Mm,
my team are, inevitably that emotion is contagious and they are going to feel that. It's like being in the staff room and you can tell that two people there's some
yeah.
tense, or it may not be a staff room, it might be
Yes.
at home, or it might be somewhere, and you can
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You don't know for sure if something's happening, but you can feel it. And
Absolutely.
this is our privilege as leaders,
Yeah.
is what's our gift? Like, how are we going to show up? What do we want to see more of in our environment and for our team?
That bit around, emotional contagion you mentioned, Hoozie, I have always, because I've always thought I'm really sensitive. I used to call it I'm really sensitive to the vibes in the room. And if I walk in, I can feel, the tension, I can feel the joy, I can feel the excitement, whatever's going on. And as I've sort of started understanding more and more about the neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches, the polyvagal theory and the concept of neuroception and how our nervous system is constantly scanning at that,
Yes.
subconscious level, and it all makes sense. It all fits in. And then the other thing that I've sort of really realized is how or why children sometimes will respond to one person in one way and then
Mm.
another person in another way, isn't it? And so you've got the same child, the same, characteristics, personality, inherent challenges that they may be facing, but they often respond really well to some teachers and then not so well with others. Um, my middle son, when he was at school in primary, he had this beautiful, beautiful teacher one year. And I used to be really amazed at how she got him to just listen to him and do things because he wouldn't do it for his previous teacher. And, we had, for us, the message we would get is that he doesn't listen, he doesn't cooperate, all of that. And then, the next year we have this teacher who talks about him so beautifully and that he's so good. And I'm like, where's the magic? What's the magic? How is she doing it? And, others don't. And I think this is the other thing, isn't it? If you feel you have that sense of relational safety and connection, then children are bound to cooperate more, learn more, be enthusiastic and excited about, what you bring to them. Um, and that's something that I'm starting to really understand, when I sort of think back on my children's journey over the years and the the different relationships they had with different teachers. Some were absolutely beautiful, wonderful. And I used to feel amazed because I used to think, oh my gosh, my child's not going to do this. And the teacher goes, no, no, he does it. Like, we've got him to do it. And I used to be amazed. Wow, how have you done it when, others haven't managed it? So I think that relational safety connection is so critical, isn't it, when you're working with children. Um, and I think it's such a foundational cornerstone of, having that trauma-informed approach in the classroom setting, making sure our kids feel safe and connected. So yeah.
100% right, Frian. I'll go back to this saying that I mentioned earlier that people don't care about what you say until they know that you care about them. Kids are the most
Yeah.
honest little human beings on earth.
Yeah.
And if they don't like you, they'll tell you or they will show you. Now, when we
Yes.
think of, and you mentioned the word safety,
Yeah.
safety is a forward motion. We're coming towards. And when we don't feel safe, we withdraw. We start to move back from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Neuroscience tells us that one of the key principles of our brain is that we are always looking for safety. Now, if you recall any little toddler
Yeah.
uh, who is with maybe a toddler in an environment, if any unfamiliar being or there's any presence that comes into the environment, that little toddler will run to wherever they feel safe, which is likely at mum or dad's knees.
Yeah.
And we know that it's a withdrawal when they feel unsafe. That is the opposite. We are describing trauma behavior. Anything that doesn't make us feel safe, secure, calm, and at peace involves that trauma. So what we want to do is provide those things so that our kids feel safe, so that they can let their hair down. And I wanted to come back to the question, which was key for those of you who are listening, is that with this behavior, it's about perception
Mm.
and it's about perspective. What my learning journey has taught me, and trust me, I've not always known what I know now. And I didn't go out to the remote community knowing all this stuff. It literally, I was refined. I was stripped of everything that I thought was the right way to do things. I was stripped of all the things that I depended upon. and my whole character was reshaped out there, and I'm grateful for that experience. What happened is that my senses were heightened, my
Mm,
awareness and my attention was heightened. Why? Because there were less distractions. We live in such a busy and noisy world right now, and we are always connected. And our brain is a limited cognitive resource.
mhm,
We have to be careful what we give attention to. That was just a little tip. Coming back to the heightening of senses and that awareness. What is missing these days that we need to do more of is listen deeply, not just with our ears, but for the things that are not obvious. Step back and observe, because we are only seeing the surface of what's happening
mhm,
at grassroots, at the heart and the core of what's happening for these children. And most of the time, they don't even know what's happening for them. And so we've got to do our best to understand what is happening for them the best that we can. Because when you have a student who says, I don't know, miss, I feel weak, I
mm,
feel slack. Like, okay, so that's the starting point. All right. And we have to start breaking things down. It really does come back to the wholeness.
yeah.
What are our kids eating?
Mm,
How much sleep are they getting? And I seriously tell you, it does come back down to these things. Every morning, we would have a student fill out like a smiley face of, did they get enough sleep? Yes, no, unhappy, no sleep at all. Did they have a good meal? How are they feeling? So we did a lot of emotional intelligence
mm,
uh, learning.
yeah.
And what that meant was, how are you feeling right now? And
Mm,
how do you want to feel? So each of our kids, just quick examples, is that we had different colored rocks. Some of you may have seen the movie Inside Out.
yeah.
We studied that inside
Yeah.
out with our kids.
Yeah.
And
It
so,
is a really good movie, isn't it?
yeah, it's
Really, really
fun
practical.
learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. And
Definitely.
so each of the characters are a different color. And so each of our students, we would have rocks and they painted them each a different color and maybe with a face on it. So it personalizes the experience and they take ownership. And without saying anything, we would know just by scanning the classroom where everybody was, what was happening for them. Somebody might have, we had like few blue rocks. Okay, we've got some joyful people here, some red, some yellow. And what that did was that we didn't need to ask as teachers. We were able to see that like that visually. And that gave us a good starting point.
That's amazing, Hoozie. Hoozie, what about the teachers themselves? In terms of, because you cannot offer connection safety if you don't feel it, right? You can't be there for a child that's dysregulated if you're not, regulated yourself.
Mm.
So, where and how did the teachers find that support as a team? Each other, what was that support like for them? Yeah, what was put in place for that?
Yeah, good question. The relationship, oh, I think this is really important because relationship is absolutely key. That's the connection. That's the connection. And if that is failing, nothing's going to go through. There's going to be no communication. And we dedicated time for teachers to spend fun time with our students. And that's coming away from curriculum. I mean the formal curriculum, the achievement objective is this. It's like our goal is for you to connect with these kids and have fun. because it's
Thing.
through those experiences and events that you form those relationships. You got to have shared purpose. And so we did a lot of activities, fun activities between the children and the teachers.
Amazing.
Most importantly, with the teachers, we, again, a lot of outside the box thinking. Each term, we committed 3 days to personal growth, and that was for the teachers.
Oh.
We left our environment, which is really key, is to dislocate from your environment that relates to work, that relates to, well, I'm still at home, so I've still got the dishes on my mind. Oh gosh, I need to hang out the clothes. Disconnect. Disconnect before you reconnect. And so we actually would spend 3 days in a nearest town, and we would do a lot of the things that I spoke about earlier as a leader. We spoke about what are some of the things that other people should understand about you that maybe they don't know and could misinterpret. And things came up such as, well, I've got one of my teachers who needs for you to look her in the eye in order for her to believe that you are giving her attention. And attention is really key these days. And for others, when they're processing information, they may look up or to the side, and that may feel like, oh, you're not listening to me, or I'm not important to you. So this opportunity revealed so much about each individual in our team that we had no idea about. But now that we do,
Yeah.
goodness me, synergy.
Yeah.
Uh, doing the things that we are really good at individually and sharing those gifts, sharing those talents with each other. So I had 2 staff, bless, who had their masters in wellbeing. And it's about, as a leader, harnessing each individual's intelligence. So what that looked like was one would lead a meditation walk to start the morning. Another would lead a meditation before we started our deep work.
Mm.
And those are just a few examples that I can think of at the top
Yeah.
of my head. But
That's amazing.
what that meant is that they were each able to, that they were highlighted in what their strengths were, and they were contributing in the areas that energized them.
And that is so valuable and critical, isn't it, Hoozie? I have heard from teachers who are really keen in the space, really, putting their heart into it, putting their effort and time and really sort of wanting to get things going, and they don't feel valued enough. They don't feel given the space to be able to do what they can, to share and contribute to sort of the wider teams. And I think that is something that you mentioned about co-leading, and I think that that's really important, isn't it? We've got to have that the willingness for whoever's in that leadership role to really first of all lead from that space of serving and allowing that co-leadership, so people can sort of really use their talents and individual interests, even, isn't it, the interest and passion, because you can contribute so much when you've got that interest and passion, and you can give so much for that shared collective good, so to speak. um,
Yeah.
so yeah. Look, you have shared so much with us. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely amazing and useful. I've got a couple more questions before we open up for questions from our attendees. One is, where and how have you blended your understanding of Te Ao Māori? And I believe you were a te reo teacher. Were you teaching te reo?
Yes.
So you're like, you've got all of this, and as you've mentioned, the language itself, and all of that you carry, I guess, and then you've got all this, you know, other new understanding, knowledge that you've gained from that Western perspective, how and where have you, I guess, blended it all, or does it even blend? You know, where do you bring those two worlds together, and how do you see, you know, them fitting together or not?
Yeah, that's good question. I have had to step back and be an observer, being, I want to call myself the visitor in an indigenous community,
Yeah.
as well as not one brain is alike, not one community is alike. I don't believe not, neither a is one cultural group
Mm,
same as another. We have our different traditions, processes, protocols, etc. 7 years I was living remote and working. And for I would say, the first year or two or three,
mm,
I observed.
okay.
I observed. Why? Because it's not my place to go in and say, hey, I think we need to change this and we need to change that.
Mm,
The Aboriginal people, the indigenous countrymen and women of Australia have taught me that, how to listen deeply and
mm,
what that looks like. It may have taken a year before some of the community members said hello.
wow. Yeah.
And so that it definitely caused some paradigm shifts. So that was now me stepping outside of my what's familiar to me
Mm,
and taking a step back and observing.
yeah.
And because there are less words in the language, there's
Mm,
more listening and there's more gestures. And
okay.
so you're listening to what is not said, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I often think about what is within our control
Mm,
and what things we can control, what things we can't. And what I did, once I had an understanding of the environment that I was in, I was able to harness the tools that were familiar to me, if that makes sense. So through my language, I was able to understand some of their language. Um, I would like to draw upon, which I think will be familiar to you, um, an ancient proverb and Maori proverb, and it is He kāka no aho. I am a seed. Stan Walker even sings the song, does a cover of the song He kāka no aho. And that is that I am a seed, not just a seed. And the rest of the song explains this. He kāka no aho, I rui a mai, I rangi a te a. And I can never be lost. I am a seed born of greatness, descending from a line of chiefs. He kāka no aho. Now, that seed is a seed of greatness.
mm,
The Maori worldview is that we are of greatness. What I think education says is it categorizes you.
mm,
Am I smart? No, it's not about are you smart or
mm,
is something wrong with you or not. It is how are you smart? We are born of greatness. Now, let's get to it. Let's discover your intelligence, how great you are.
amazing.
And
It's really, really amazing, Hoozie, the shift in perspective. And I think what that does and what that brings to the person, to the individual, um, you know, when we start seeing our children through that um perspective of being valued, being appreciated, being celebrated. They believe in themselves. And what I've noticed is our kids, our kids are, they have that sense of pride, sense of belonging, sense of, who they are, and that they can be themselves and still be valued. And I think that's something it's been heartbreaking for me to see over the years where, not all children have got that.
Mm.
Um, Often are disabled, neurodivergent, children have been othered, been, made to feel less than. And that is what I feel causes a lot of the educational trauma, I say, in the education spaces for a lot of our children, disabled, neurodivergent, or those who don't fit in for whatever reason, right? Those who don't belong or neatly in a box. Um, I recall getting really upset when my son was actually just a preschooler, and we were looking for a preschool for him. And every preschool we had gone to, I kept getting the message that, oh, he's lovely, but but we wouldn't be able to support him well enough. So you'd be better off going to another place. And I remember eventually feeling really frustrated, and I said this out loud to one of the places we'd been, and we got the same response. And I said, actually, I said, there is no place apparently for my son um, that's perfect for him. So I said, so we're going to have to just make one for him, and I've seen over the years so many children made to feel less than great, made to feel less than, good enough even.
Mm.
And this is one of the reasons why I have been drawn, because I grew up in India. Um, so I didn't have any understanding of Te Ao Māori until I moved to New Zealand and sort of slowly started, understanding more and more. And I love the concepts, the values, the language, like you said, that Te Ao Māori brings, because it is so holistic. It is so it allows for that interconnection. It allows for really holistic and positive perspective. And yeah, and also processes, in terms of sort of when you look at the restorative practices and things like that, rather than the punitive way of doing things. So yeah, so for me, that's where I'm just learning little bits and pieces. But what you've said is really, really beautiful, and I really wish we would have more of that perspective, for each of our children in their schools and their communities. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for singing that beautiful song. That was beautiful. So, Hoozie, tell me a bit about where are you at now? What are you doing now? And yeah.
Yes. Well, I like to say that what I do is not who I am. And so my focus is on doing the things that energize me. I'm going to be honest in saying uh, that I have been burnt through and through. In fact, I reached a stage, that stage. And I thought to myself, surely this is not living. Life is meant to be enjoyed, not endured. And I know that we'll go through hardship, and that's inevitable. We can do hardship in a different light. And so I decided I am going to focus on the things that energize me. I am going to look at, well, what are my natural skills? What do I love doing? How can I um, make that? And, how can I live that way? And that's a really big test. And that can be scary. So my husband and I, we left our full-time jobs and we decided, not all at once, and I don't
Yeah.
recommend just to like stop, don't do that. But we transitioned into uh, making a lot more space to do the things that we love and creatively think about, oh, how can we make this what we call a job? So with that neuroscience, I decided, right, I love it. I'm going to study it. And what I find captivating is neuroplasticity because it says that we're not fixed. Like my mind is not fixed. I can actually, reshape, rewire, and be who it is that I want to be in this world. So I formally, if you'd like to put it, I am a corporate facilitator. uh, Leaders internationally who are studying neuroscience of leadership. I meet with them every so often throughout their course of learning, and they share their insights, the reflections, and what the neuroscience principles look like applied within their workspaces. Naturally, these principles filter into our personal lives. That's the cool thing.
Mhm.
And that's what I enjoy too. And you mentioned coaching earlier, so I do coach. I also do workshops. It just translates into every area of your life. And so, along with education, like as teachers, you're a counselor, you're a parent, etc., etc. With this space and neuroplasticity, it just translates. And so wherever the need is, that's where we're going.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Hoozie, thank you. Thank you so much for coming along, sharing all of that beautiful insights and your own personal experiences and journey with us. We really, really do appreciate it. What I'm gonna do is I am going to stop recording and then we can take some questions. But before I stop recording, I will just do our little karakia, um, and then we can move on to the questions, okay? So karakia whakamotunga. Kia whakairia te tapu, kia watia ai te ara. Kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie, huie, taikie. So restrictions are moved aside, so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Kia ora.
Thank you for